Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great guest and another great podcast. I love bringing you different guests that bring different viewpoints. And this week, I think we've got a guest that you're going to truly enjoy. Joel Goldberg. He's a native of suburban Philadelphia and Chicago. And Joe has been a member of the Kansas City Royals television broadcast team since 2008, serving as the host of every pregame and postgame show on Fox Sports Kansas City. The University of Wisconsin graduate won a 2001 Mid-America Emmy for sports reporting and has covered multiple championship teams in Major League Baseball and the National Football League. Joel's built a 25-year career developing and maintaining strong relationships with professional athletes, coaches, and team management. And now he shares those stories and strategies with companies and associations live on stage and these days virtually also. He's hosted a weekly podcast called Rounding the Bases the last 2 years and added a daily live video podcast when the pandemic started, focusing on leadership during these challenging times. Joe, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Gary, great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, I love starting with kind of the story because, of course, now we hear, you've been with the Royals for a long time and you've been a broadcaster for 25 years. But who is Joe, the person that kind of decided to get into sports broadcasting, and share us a little bit of that journey?
Well, if I go way, way back, Gary, to my early years living outside of Philadelphia, and then we moved to Chicago when I was 13, I was, and really even into my career, a diehard Philadelphia sports fan. And, all these years later, I'm really not a fan of teams in the same way because it's work, but I still have that love and passion for sports. And I knew at a very early age that while I loved, like many kids, going outside and playing every single sport known to man and all that type of stuff, I wasn't that good at them. I was average at best, but I certainly love to talk about them. So very early on, maybe even as early as 7, 8 years old, I believed that I wanted to be on TV. And I don't know that I ever deviated, or that dream ever deviated. I don't know that there was ever a moment where I said, yeah, maybe I'll do something else. And so there were a lot of challenges getting there, but there was never a thought process. Maybe there was a little bit of like, well, if this doesn't work out, what would I do? But I never really seriously pursued anything else.
Yeah, and it kind of became who you wanted to be at a very early age, so you was able to really move forward with that. What would you tell someone that they're struggling to find, they know where they want to be, but they're struggling to get there with the journey that you had? What would be one of the tips or suggestions you would share with them to move forward?
I think to be able to say don't give up and chase your dreams is true, but I think we hear that from everyone. And I think that what I would tell people is, one, nothing generally comes easy. And certainly if it's a dream, then it's not something that is easy to achieve. So it does take work. It does take some luck. It does take timing. It does take connections. But, luck and connections come from the work that you put in, the people that you meet, and putting yourself out there. So while it often can feel like you have no control over it, you do. At least you have control over changing your odds. And so I would say work on those things, work on your relationships, whatever the profession is, work on increasing your odds. You don't have to be the best or be better than everyone else. You have to be able to be different than everyone else, because that's how you get noticed, by getting to the front of the line somehow. I wasn't the best when I broke in, but I figured out how to get to the front of the line and get noticed and to be genuine and authentic. And the last piece that I would say to that is, maybe not everything is achievable, but if you're going to go down with a fight, so that later on, whenever that is, and you look back, you could say, you know what, I did everything I could, instead of second guessing yourself.
Yeah. And I love that philosophy. And the thing is, I kind of ask you that for a purpose because we both like to talk about culture. You've seen it in the sports world in championship teams and in teams that, to be quite honest, I'm sure you went in the clubhouses, then the culture wasn't as positive and wasn't that championship teams. So since we both like to talk about that culture side of it, what do you think are some of the key components that you've seen for a company or a sports team to build a championship culture and be able to sustain that culture?
I think there are a lot of elements, as you know. There's no one secret sauce to this. I do think that if you're looking for a secret sauce, it's all about the people. It's always about the people. And that sounds so basic, but how often do we hire the best talent and sacrifice who the person is with maybe them not being the right fit? And so I think it's about people. I also think it's about roles because, and I could use a sports term here, and let's just talk basketball because it's easiest in terms of numbers. You're not putting out 5 LeBron James or 5 Michael Jordans on the floor. One, they don't exist, but two, you can't have 5 superstars. And I don't know what the number or the limit is or within a company, but there has to be a buy-in from everyone on the top and at the bottom, whatever that means, that every one of those roles matters. And so the ticket taker or the accountant or the nighttime security person still matters, should matter as much as the superstar cleanup hitter. Doesn't mean they're going to be paid the same way. Doesn't mean they're going to get the same attention. Don't have to. It's still all about the superstars and the players. They're the ones that are going to make the money. They're going to the ones that are going to bring in the crowds, right? The big time salesperson at the company is going to be the one that makes the most money and brings in the most money. But if you don't value the lesser roles, those people aren't going to have a whole lot of pride in their jobs. But when you feel like you're a part of it, and when you say, yeah, hey, we won a championship, and if the response is, yeah, but I was just the janitor. Well, how much are you a part of it? But when the response is, hey, what do you do with them? Well, I'm the custodian, and we just won a championship. We were just ranked number 1. There's your culture where everyone matters, their role matters, and how you treat them and how you take care of them matters.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love too. I've talked to some of my clients now. We really got to change job descriptions, the role descriptions, because what we're looking for is people to play a certain role in it. We see that in sports all the time, but we have to understand in business, the same thing is true. We want them to play that role. And that's where you're looking at that character, that attitude. And everyone can't be the boss, can't be the leader. But are they willing to play that role? And then number one, in the organizations, we can help build them up because maybe that person does have talent. They just need experience to be able to move forward, just like you've seen in the sportscasting world.
And when you say not everyone can be, star or whatever, that's true. But in some form or another, and I think as leaders, we have to recognize this, that everyone within an organization can be a leader. Mm-hmm. They may not be part of the leadership team. They may not be the ones that everyone is turning to and saying, hey, you run the meeting or you make the decisions. But that parking lot attendant can be a leader in the way they act. That parking lot attendant can make this massive impression on fellow employees or customers coming in. And when they walk out and they say, wow, what a great smile or what great energy. When you pull into the drive-through and you order food, and that person says, here you go. Or they say, hey, how's it going? Hope you're having a great day. And you pull away with a warm feeling. It has nothing to do with how good the food was or not, but just the experience. That person's a leader because they've now influenced maybe me in going away saying, you know what, I need to pay that forward. I need to go out there and make sure that I put a smile on someone's face today. So I think we all have an ability to be leaders, even if we're not in leadership roles. And then the flip side to that is that from the top and from the designated leaders, the leaders in description and title, and we talked about maybe removing some of those titles, but there's, I think, an important burden, maybe that's the wrong word, but an important responsibility from those quote unquote leaders to recognize those others for what they're doing and helping lead.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the key is about really finding out those strengths and realizing everyone has their strengths. And when everyone
Mhm.
brings that to the table, to the team, of course, everything gets elevated. I'm sure you've seen that. So what's some of them similarities that you've seen between successful sports teams and kind of those business teams that really does elevate their level, allow them to win the championship, or allow them to really allow the business to expand and grow and really impact the larger audience?
I think the similarities, and I don't want to minimize this either. Talent does matter, but we all know that talented teams and organizations don't always win. I remember one year walking into the visiting clubhouse in Kansas City, and the Dodgers were in town for interleague play, and they had guys running around and clowning around, and I think they were watching the World Cup and they were celebrating goals, and it was like a playland in there. It was so much fun, and I turned to a veteran on the team, and I said, "Man, this is awesome, huh?" And he said, "When we're winning." And I thought, really? And he said, "Oh, you should see it when we're losing." And it was a private conversation, so I won't share names, and it wasn't a big name player either. But that always struck me that and they were loaded with talent. I mean, the Dodgers are always loaded with talent, but it didn't mean that they had the right mix. So I think that whether it be in the corporate world, whether it be in the sports world, by the way, at any level, I think that you have to have the right mix of people. It goes a little bit back to what I was saying before, of everybody understanding their role, recognizing their role, and being valued. That's the one thing. I think the other thing is there just needs to be a buy-in to who you are as an organization, which has to do with identity. It has to do with mission, has to do with purpose. And so I always like to say, from a sports term, you're a Cardinals fan, and I don't remember a time, you do, but I don't remember a time when the Cardinals were just flat out bad. And my memory of that, just from a personal standpoint, goes back to when I got there in '98. My first season covering the Cardinals was '99, and I'm long gone. I left there after '07, but they haven't been bad in a year. And even if they were, my question then would be, have they maintained their identity? And so what I always like to say about sports is, if the word way, W-A-Y, comes after the name of the team, then there's probably an identity and a buy-in. And so I'll use the Cardinals, not just because but I think it's a great example that while the names and faces have changed, I've been gone for so long, there are only two guys that are left, and this has been the case for a while, Yadier Molina and Adam Wainwright. When those guys came up, they learned from those before them. Yadier Molina learned from Mike Matheny, and he learned from Albert Pujols, and Adam Wainwright learned from Chris Carpenter and Darryl Kyle and guys like that. And now the young guys, who better than I do, because I don't see the Cardinals a whole lot, have learned from Molina, and they've learned from Wainwright. And I've seen guys come and go like Matt Holliday and now Nolan Arenado. And before that, when I was there, Larry Walker and Reggie Sanders. And so if you're not a sports fan listening to this, I'll just say that they've had this influx of guys that have come in. But what's happened is they've rarely brought players in from the outside that don't fit. And they've also brought guys in that can be custodians to the way that they do things. That's the way. It's deeper to explain exactly what each team's way is, but there's a Yankees way. There's a Cardinals way. When I got to Kansas City in '08, there was no Royals way. There is, in spite of having lost the last few years, a Royals way. So that all built up, it culminated in the championship. It doesn't always. They win the pennant in 2014. They win the world championship in 2015. They're still competitive in 16 and 17. And then being in a smaller market, they lose talent. And so they've now grown that talent since. Their goal is to try to be, among other things, like the Cardinals in being able to sustain this long term. But here's what happened, Gary. They never lost their culture or their way. So while the talent went down, and that becomes, how do you maintain in a smaller market competitive advantage or disadvantage? How do you maintain your talent? But you have to maintain your culture, because that's not something you could build overnight.
Yeah. And the one point I really think you've made too is the culture doesn't always come from the top. It has to be cultivated by the people. You talked about the players. It has to be the individuals. Top leaders or the owners of the organization can help create it, because number one, they've got to hire the right people. They got to find the right attitude for those. But you can't just make culture happen by saying from the top, okay, we're going to have this type of culture. It has to be cultivated from the people that's within the organization. And I think that sometimes leaders think, oh, we can create, this culture by just, this is what it's going to be. It has to be from the team and kind of build up from that and kind of really grow and prosper from that part of it.
It's kind of like when you hand the car keys to your kids, and you certainly have some fear with it, but there comes a point where they start driving themselves, and there has to be a trust factor. And if they can't do it, then you take the car away from them, right? And I think that's what it is. That doesn't mean that you don't check on them. That doesn't mean that you aren't giving them some advice, or sometimes they miss some things. But you are handing the keys to the culture car, if you will. I just came up with that one. It's nothing flashy other than the alliteration. But you're handing the keys to somebody to drive the vehicle, to drive the organization. And that doesn't come from mom or dad. That doesn't come from the top. But you hope that they go out there and they do things the way that you taught them. And by the way, driving that car or that culture with the organization, you don't check a box and then say, okay, I got it. It takes attention and it takes effort every single day, whether that's the way you treat people, whether that's the way that, and so what happens is, as management, yes, you check on it. And yes, you need to address some things every now and then. But, I mentioned the Cardinals players. With the Royals, the guy that has really helped, that was there for the building of the culture and then really helped to spread that culture, was Alex Gordon. And Alex is a more quiet guy, but he was the team leader, and he was here for 14 years. And so he retired last year. But I know that I have zero concerns about their culture or their leadership, because everything that he learned, he passed on to the guys that were coming behind him, or the guys that were teammates with his. And so now players like Whit Merrifield, who learned from him and learned from Eric Hosmer, will run that clubhouse now. When they bring in some other guys from the outside, this is the Royals way, and this is how we do things. So it's an everyday effort. Attention and eyes are always on you as leaders. And, it's the good old put up or shut up. And it's you're going to be evaluated and judged on everything you do. You should be. And they're not all big moments. They're subtle little things. How do you handle adversity? How do you welcome new people in? What are you doing to help others out? What are you doing to put them in the best place to succeed at their job every single day?
Yeah, I think that becomes a real key. And I think the thing that I really enjoyed, which Joel just had a recently published book, Small Ball, Big Results, is, Joel, you really not just showed the sports world, you showed how it's happening in the business world also. And what the book, I was fortunate, I've been able to read this. A lot of times I don't get to read my guests before I get to have them on, but I really got into your book. And I told you this before, and I'm not just saying it, is you're a great storyteller. So you really incorporate those stories, in which we know we learn from stories. We like stories. I mean, when we come to watch baseball, some of the stories is what grabs us and that attention that's there. But you did it in a way where you have the business side of it in sports world really captivating some of those lessons. And I guess I would just really be curious of what made you decide to write it, and then kind of what propelled you forward to say, okay, I'm going to put the time in to make that happen, because writing a book is not a small feat.
Yeah, you know that, and you know it better than I do, because you're well ahead of me in terms of books written, which I'm always amazed at, because I do fully understand now what a process it is. And I always knew it had to be a process. I just didn't know what the process was. But, I'll back up, because when you are working in a profession where you're living your dream, it's very easy to be satisfied, because, hey, this is what I always wanted to do. But I think my off seasons, I work 6 to 7 days a week in a non-pandemic, at least for 6 months a year. And so the off seasons were my off seasons. And, I wanted to do some other things, would dabble in some other sports. And I accidentally stumbled upon, and you know how amazing this is, a speaking career, and had some suggestions of, hey, you should take these lessons and apply them to the, quote unquote real world. And so when I started my speaking career, the idea came up about 4 years ago. Everybody told me to write a book. Speakers write books, and you know that. And I had no clue what I would write about. And I did know that, like, writing about the 2015 World Championship wasn't going to get me speeches or open doors, be interesting for some Royals fans. Writing about how to be a broadcaster would have a niche audience. It wasn't really going to serve the purpose of writing a book for that. So I scrapped the idea and I started my podcast instead, and very intentionally was and still am interviewing people outside the sports world, occasionally in the sports world, but people like yourself, Gary, and people with stories to tell and people with lessons to be taught. And anything from entrepreneurs to CEOs and everyone in between. And being a storyteller, that was a lane that I was very comfortable in, even outside of sports. And so I would ask them some baseball themed questions, just like I did you. What's the biggest home run you've hit professionally? What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken? And what is small ball? What are the little things that add up to the big things? And that answer was always so fascinating to me. And along the way, as I was developing speaking content that wasn't just baseball and then all this written content, suddenly I realized I got enough information here to put together, I believe, a very thoughtful book about culture, leadership, and the little things that add up to the big things. And so I spent a good chunk of, the not so memorable 2020 working on a book and taking advantage of that time.
Well, congratulations. You did a great job, and I highly recommend it. Small ball, big results. We'll have a link in our show notes, how you can go to Joel's podcast, and he'll share with us how you can get that from each area. But I would tell you, pick it up, because it's one of those that, number one, it was just an easy read, Joel. I like stories, and you had the stories, and then you followed it up with the point, or you had the leadership point, and then you had the story behind it to really back it up. And I congratulate you on a great job of putting it together. Now, since you're talking about baseball themed questions, and we're in that baseball season now that we're in the second quarter of 2021, I'll ask you a question. How does live television teach you to adjust to any curveball thrown your way?
Oh, that's, I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that question, but I certainly have thought about it a lot. And it's a phenomenal question, because, and I think this is important too, Gary, because, most people can't relate to what it's like to be on live TV. However, everyone can now, because of the pandemic and being on a Zoom call. Yeah. In some form or another, we are all on live television every day. And my guess is that everyone, while they may not always like it, or they may not like it at all, or maybe they do, they have become more comfortable with it today, as we're recording this in March of 2021, than where they were back in March or April of 2020. And whether you like it or not, you've done it more and you're used to it. And what you have all learned is nothing ever goes as planned. The mute button's off, the dog's coming in, the whatever, right? The camera's messed up. And so, for the most part, you don't cancel your meeting, you roll with it and you make the best of it. That's live television. That's hitting the curveball. Nothing ever goes as planned. And that is no different than life, right? I almost think you can make a joke about the weather. Today it might be 30 and tomorrow it might be 60, and everybody says, well, only in Kansas City or only in Chicago. They say that everywhere. Yeah. Because, and then they get mad at the meteorologists, because it's hard sometimes to predict, weather and science and all that type of stuff. But nothing in life ever goes as planned. But from a TV standpoint, the show goes on. In less than every now and then, the plug is pulled and you're off the air, and then they figure out how to get you back on and the show continues. And so, to me, live television, lessons learned there is, it's not so much expect the unexpected, it's just be able to handle the unexpected. That's the first part. The second part, and because I say that, like, expect the unexpected almost means you're bracing for it. But to me, it's not like I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, what happens if something goes wrong in the broadcast? But when it does, it's just, okay, what can we do with it now? That's the first part. And then the second part is that I had some advice early on in my career of stop trying to memorize, stop trying to sit there and script every single thing you want to say. And I think that can apply in life too. I didn't say don't do your homework or don't be prepared, but what I did say was stop memorizing, because if you know your stuff, like I don't know what your preparation process, and then I'm not asking you to share it, for a podcast like this is. Of course, you want to research your guest, and you may script out questions or you may not, but you know as well as I do, and my style is my style, that if you have a comfort level and a feel for me, if your notes all had coffee dumped on them right now, you could do this interview and you would be fine because you know who I am and you know what your process is. And so what ends up happening there, you end up being more natural. And that's what I've learned on live television is you're never winging it. I hate the expression winging it, but I think that if you know what you're talking about, you know the subject, or you've done a little bit of homework and you're knee deep in it, as I am every day in baseball, in theory, I could show up at the last minute and be just fine. And that sometimes is what happens with live television when you're throwing that curveball.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is really what you shared is what we have to expect in life. Everything's not going to go exactly as we have scripted out. And if we're willing to adjust, then that's when it allows us to really move forward with ourselves. Otherwise, we're always sitting in, well, we're not going to do anything, so we don't move forward. Well, kind of be our last question before we jump to the recharge round, but it made me think of really kind of what was your craziest camera moment in the last 25 years in broadcasting, kind of just to share with the group, I think would be a fun question.
Oh, this is an easy one, at least. There've been a bunch, and I would say that Will Ferrell walking into the middle of an interview that I was doing and pretty much taking over was, thrilling and a lot of fun. Rowdy Roddy Piper, the legendary late wrestler, showing up at Wrigley Field and suddenly scrapping a segment and putting him on a Cardinals pregame show. And I don't know what we had scheduled, but I promise you that was better. But, I've been lucky enough not to have too many embarrassing moments. I haven't dropped any words that I wasn't supposed to drop. So I've been, I don't want to say lucky there. I mean, I work hard at that. But my second year in Kansas City, they were doing stadium renovations and, and new restaurants or vendors and all that type of stuff. And my producer set me up with an interview. And he said, hey, in the third or fourth inning, why don't you go out and interview Guy Fieri, the food guy on TV. I just met him. He'll be on the first base line. Here's the section. He said he'll do an interview. And so I go out and I do the interview, and it's live television, and I don't watch his show, although my wife did. And it just, something felt off. So I didn't know the guy, and it just I didn't know him, but for being a big time TV personality, he didn't have a whole lot of personality. And I thought, what is going on here? And I realized, I don't remember if it was 3 minutes, 5 minutes in, that this isn't Guy Fieri. Like, this is an imposter. And my producer had met him walking through the stadium and thought, hey, this could be cool to do something different. So, I got sent down that path. And of course we were in the digital age at that point enough. I mean, it was 2009 that became, even to this day, Gary, like I'll every now and then, 12 years later, get some fan trying to troll me on Twitter saying, hey, what about that fake interview with Guy Fieri? And I'm like, I don't know how old you are. You might've been in diapers back then. But that was one that was a little bit tough to shake at first, because I'm like, I didn't really, I wasn't the one that set it up. But, there is a lesson there learned too when you're on, when you're the guy that's front and center, it's on you.
Yeah.
And it's part of a team. And we've got people behind the scenes that I will always say are more valuable than what I do. We can't live without them, and they're talented, and people aren't supposed to know their name. And they don't look for the credit, but at the same time, they're not the ones that should get the blame when something goes wrong. And so it was a, it wasn't a catastrophic moment or anything like that, but it was an awkward, embarrassing moment. And I'm still here all these years later.
Well, thanks for sharing. That's an interesting story.
It was bizarre.
Sure at the time. Very interesting. Well, we're going to go to the recharge round. And on these, we're going to kind of try to throw you some fastballs, because you got to go through them pretty quick. And you've seen a few good pitchers that have some great fastballs. My first one is a pretty easy one. I'll be honest. It's more of the changeup. My podcast is named Charge, Create Habits Around Real Goals Every Day. What habit do you think's led to success in your life?
I think just two quick ones here. One is just always treating people well, understanding that everybody matters. I touched on that a little bit before. And I think two, and it's a little bit of a sports theme to it too, is just finding something every day that you can hang your hat on having won. And it might just be, hey, I cleared through my emails, or it might be, hey, I made a new connection, or it might, whatever it is, find something when you put your head on the pillow every single night. It can be tiny, to say, hey, I accomplished this today, that I did something successful.
Great. Next one is, I call it simple positive action, of course. And if you take the first letter out of each one of them, it's SPA. And we all like going to SPA to be able to create that atmosphere and kind of relax us. Well, what's your simple positive action you take each day to move forward to achieve your goals?
I think for me, it's just finding a way. I mean, there's not a day that ever goes by that I'm not in contact with someone, if not many people. That seems kind of basic, but there's some people that don't have connections or network or whatever it is every single day. And just seeing if I can make a meaningful connection every single day. A little bit of, putting your head on the pillow again at the end of the day and feeling like you accomplished something. Can I have had a meaningful conversation? It doesn't mean, hey, I need to land X amount of business or sell this or this, but can I make one meaningful connection, have one meaningful conversation? And sometimes that's just calling and checking on someone, how you doing? Hey, how's the job search going? And there may not be a benefit, but can you make an impact in someone's life, at least one person every single day?
Excellent. How about your biggest life lesson and what did you learn from it?
I think the biggest life lesson is to, you know what, this is actually a newer one lately, but it still goes back to a lot of things that I've done over the years, is to not create false stories in your head. It's a little bit of the imposter syndrome thing, but that goes back to so many relationships that I messed up in locker rooms and with athletes, where I thought one thing of them and maybe they thought one thing, another thing of me. And I played that out the wrong way in my head. Don't create false narratives in your head. And that applies so much to business, to interviews in life, where you assume that they're not interested, or you assume that they haven't called you back and that must mean this or that. And we play these games in our head. And so I think that's it, is make sure that you truly understand and communicate with people before you make these assumptions.
Excellent. Well, Joe, I truly appreciate having you on the Charge podcast. Some great information. Please share with them. Number one, first on the book, how could they go get a copy of that? Because I know if they go to your website, you got kind of a special deal for them. And then also, as far as if they just want to kind of get some information or follow you on any social media, and we'll also have all that in show notes.
I appreciate that. Well, as far as the book goes, of course, you can buy it on Amazon. So that's easy. But also my website, joelgoldbergmedia.com. There's a link to there, but there's also a form to fill out if you want an autographed copy. And it's just a few bucks more, which helps cover shipping and all that. So you could do that through there. And then as far as social media, I'm on every platform. I wish I had the same name or handle or whatever it is for every single one. But if you type in some version of Goldberg KC or Joel Goldberg KC, you'll find me on YouTube and Facebook. And I've got Facebook. That might be Joel Goldberg Media. I don't know. Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that stuff. So I'm all over the place. Easy to find, easy to get a hold of.
Yeah. And please check him out, and we'll have all that in show notes. So if you can't remember all that, or you're exercising or cutting grass right now, just go to chargepodcast.com and all that information will be easily clickable for you to be able to check Joe out. Joe, I hope you have a great season this year with the baseball season. And I really hope we're able to have people be out enjoying it more this year as we go forward. And because it's it's a national pastime that really makes up our country. So I'm looking forward to this season, and I hope you have an enjoyable season.
I appreciate it. Me too. And good things are ahead. It was great to be on with you, Gary, and really enjoyed getting to know you in the recent months.
You too, my friend. Chargers, I hope you take something there and decide, okay, what am I going to move forward? What am I going to take action on? Because it's great to hear information, but what can I do? And I would tell you, check out Joel's book and then really decide what fits you in the conversation we had. Because what type of culture do you want to create for yourself? We talk about it a lot on this podcast, but positive culture comes from within. How can you make a difference to someone today? Joel talked about that. Maybe you reach out to somebody that you haven't reached out to in a while and just connect with them and make that difference to them. Chargers, I look forward to having you back next week. Remember, like and share the podcast and let others know about it. That's how we keep growing. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Make it a great day.
podcast has ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.